presenter today is Refa. Everybody here, Refa?
Yes.
Refa is our second presenter today. I really enjoyed, she sits right next to Abby. They work together and they work hard together. I really enjoyed working with both of them. Refa's topic in her paper, I really enjoyed reading. So much information. And she's such a good writer.
Thank you, Mr.
Excellent writer. Anyway, I'm going to read her acknowledgments. Just have patience. It may take a while. These are Refa's words. She says, "First, I would like to thank God for strengthening my commitment and passion in this topic, who in times when I lost motivation and got overwhelmed by the constant workload always reminds me that I'm not alone, who I pray would guide me through this thesis presentation from start to finish. I would also like to thank Jerry or Gary, I don't know how the name is pronounced, Gary Van Klinken, the researcher whose book I stumbled across and ignited my academic fervor towards politics, leading me to explore deeper into our country's roots. Quite ironic that it is a foreign researcher who managed to spark my love for the country. I reluctantly thank my friends who barely tolerate the roller coaster of emotions I went through this year, be it from Thesis, university application, or from reading R.F. Kuang's books. If you listen to my plea and read them, I know you would cry as I do as well. But you guys also relied on political news from me as if I'm a professional news anchor. In a way, it helps me stay updated on Indonesian's politics. Thank you for that, I guess. I thank my teachers as well, who have been willing to be disturbed by nearly 30 minutes of speeches I was desperately trying to make shorter, and who have listened to me asking absurd questions, especially my advisor, Mr. J.C., who's willing to listen to me question my own thesis before we would spend the rest 80% of the consultation talking about ancient philosophers. Trust me, I enjoy the talk, even though I always leave your class questioning the world order. Additionally, I'm grateful for my parents who listened to me verbally panicking about Thesis while simultaneously remaining as a potato couch. Couch potato? Potato couch. To my mom, who often challenges me with critiques against the government, and to my dad, who entertains my philosophical mullings and often ends our discussions with, agree to disagree. I would also thank Mr. Wade and Ms. Maymay. I know you stress about my thesis and speech length, but I'm glad you put enough faith in me, right? Yes, to place me here today. Thank you for reading through Aristotle and Montesquieu with me, and for still accepting assignments weeks past their due dates at 2 a.m. without questioning my work-life balance. I think I have questioned that, actually. Lastly, I want to thank Mr. Rio and Mr. Tony as my panelists. Thank you for showing interest in my thesis, and I apologize for putting you through my writing of bombastic words in classical books. I hope you enjoy the journey as much as I do. And perhaps to my friend's dismay, as R.F. Kuang said, history isn't a pre-made tapestry that we've got to suffer, a closed world with no exit. We can form it, make it, we just have to choose to make it. And now, Refa's title is Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace, the Deliberation Crisis in Indonesian Democracy. Give me a second to set up the timer, and I'll tell you when you can start. All right, you can start when ready.
Dark against light. Black umbrellas line up tightly. Their darkened bearers were not eyes fixed on the majestic white architecture before them. Among these figures stands a woman, her hair ashen by age and grief, a megaphone slung across her frail stature. Her name is Maria Katarina Sumarsi. The media knows her as Ibu Sumarsi. It has been 20 years since she first stood in front of Istana Negara. 20 years since she has been convening there every Thursday. 30 years since her son was shot dead by the state apparatus. Her son, Wawan, whose life was mercilessly taken by a military-grade bullet that pierced his activist vest, whose life was compensated at just 5 million rupiahs by the government. So every Thursday, black top, black trousers, under a black umbrella, Ibu Sumarsi, with every other mother who lost their sons and daughters, they stand in front of Istana Negara at 4 p.m., asking, "Where is my child?" Within the shadows of global development, Indonesia's path to democracy faced its own turbulences. It sustained a quasi-democratic government during the early regimes and the revolution that staggered its transition into the Reformation era, which is marked by public accountability and participation. Now democracy has grown increasingly prevalent, its adoption reaching 40% of global states. By its definition, the theoretical democracy consistently centers on civil liberty and majority rule. Yet, despite its universality, the quality of global democracy has dwindled over the recent years. Indonesia, for instance, underwent a decline in its rule of law or judicial integrity, a blunder that is especially apparent in recent public outrage towards the government from late August to early September 2025, marked by police brutality and excessive violence. Ironically, government officials have responded to these protests with tone-deaf remarks, calling protesters the most idiotic people in the world instead of attempting to engage in a mannerly discussion. Faced with constant government misconduct, some people conclude that Indonesia's democracy is only flawed to the extent of corrupt and ineffective administration. However, our issues run far deeper within the different contexts that have shaped the country today. As a response, several scholars introduced an alternative framework: deliberative democracy, a system that underlines consensus building built on 4 bases: reason-giving requirement, accessibility, binding result, and a dynamic process. Given this reality, Indonesia lacks the adequate foundation to pursue its current form of democracy for 3 reasons: its historical and cultural context, a disconnected government, and the citizens' lack of political education. Thus, we have to call for a systemic reform, ideally through deliberative democracy. First, Indonesia's cultural and historical roots serve as damaging foundations for its democratic practices. For one, our present politics and culture still inherit an old feudalistic system. Indonesia derives its feudal system from a Hindu manuscript, defining feudalism as the king's absolute right over property ownership and bureaucracy. This would serve as the foundation of former Javanese political structure as well as its Islamic kingdoms. Within this structure, the people were categorized into different groups: landowners and peasants. Between these distinct groups are village heads, who depend on landowners because they have been granted positions as small power holders. The feudalistic system was retained and even strengthened during colonial times, with hierarchical structures that were often based on hereditary lineage. Today, we can still see feudal arrangement persist in practices such as political dynasties. The feudal values present in our modern society acts as fertile ground for patronage politics. The patronage culture bases relationships on loyalty or debt. This kind of relationships has thrived in Indonesia since its monarchical era and during the colonial period, where local governments would show loyalty towards Dutch authorities in return for control over a small portion of land, a strict hierarchical pattern rooted in feudal principles. Post-independence, patronage networking became a tool for new political elites. President Sukarno relied on it to secure the loyalties of military and political allies. President Suharto institutionalized it through strong clientelistic relationships with business players and the army. During the Reformation era, patronage culture lived a new phase. political reforms became the stage for business players to be directly involved in governance, creating systematic oligarchy all over the country. After sustaining constant authoritarian regime, Indonesia crashed into democracy without a proper transitional period, critically ill-equipped. The democratization period plays a crucial role in determining a country's future democratic quality. Indonesia started with monarchical foundation before being struck by a century of colonial era. This pattern continued post-colonial until the new order, before stopping abruptly at President B.J. Habibie's administration. Even then, Habibie's controversial support for East Timor's devolution sabotaged his office, totaling it to only 500 days. With feudal values, patronage culture, and an abrupt transition, our democratic foundation proves to be alarmingly fragile. Moving on, the essence of representation in Indonesia's current political practices contradicts democracy. As one of the bases of modern democracy, our election system produced procedural instead of substantive participation. Being a new democracy, Indonesia has a unique experience where our electoral laws have changed in every election cycle. Political participation often falls flat as a mere form of mobilization, restricted to campaigning period and without sufficient participative means. As a result, our electoral process fails to fulfill one of its goals: political education. The citizens hold no negotiating power. They are simply listeners. Indonesia's election draws heavily from the proportional representation system, where voters can directly select individual candidates based on their preferences and knowledge. While this allows the chosen candidate to hold direct accountability towards their constituents, it creates a candidate-centric rather than a party-centric politics. Instead of being committed to a political party ideals, personal financial incentives become more influential for candidates because they aim to enrich their familiarity among voters. This makes the electoral framework very costly. Due to this, political parties often become a means to earn profit rather than to articulate public's opinion. Political parties are the only organizations in Indonesia that can nominate candidates for election. However, the high cost of campaigns create incentives for financial recovery, urging elected officials to exploit their offices to recoup the money spent. Let's put it into perspective. During the 2009 until 2014 general election, candidates' campaign expenditures reached a staggering 4.5 billion rupiahs. So the question emerges: how do these high costs attract illicit practices? After the 90% government political aid cut in 2004, political parties in Indonesia rely largely on two funding sources: external funding from external donors or personal funding. These funds fuel politicians' reliance on patron-client relationships, leading to biased representation and conflicts of interest. While we have an extensive laws on political funding, in reality, Indonesia still lacks a monitoring system to investigate such cases, and consequences tend to stop at weak administrative punishments. At the same time, these systems weaken the trias politica power balance within Indonesia itself. Indonesia deduces its constitutional system from Montesquieu's power division: the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches, trias politica. To address its authoritarian past, however, Indonesia modified this framework by limiting presidential authority. This manifests in a legislature with a higher lawmaking system than the executive, and in a multi-party system, where political parties can form coalition to support the president while still being a part of the legislative. Regrettably, these adjustments instead weaken checks and balances. Indonesia's president consistently formed broad coalitions that leave little room for opposition in the legislature. Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono's coalition secured over 70% of legislative seats, similar to Joko Widodo's. Currently, Prabowo Subianto consolidated over 80% of legislative seats with virtually no opposition, as the only non-coalition party, PDIP, claims neutrality. Judicial independence is likewise compromised. Indonesia's legal framework tends to act only after complaints arise, while courts often yield to majority interests and political stability. For instance, despite repeated criticisms over its ambiguity, the Constitutional Court consistently upheld the anti-blasphemy law. When checks and balances become blurred, we must monitor, question, and influence political processes. This is where a deliberative platform becomes crucial. Following this argument, Indonesian citizens' political behavior is shaped by material insecurity and an education system that fails to cultivate deliberative capacity. Studies have shown that higher levels of education is associated with more critical attitudes and greater political participation. This is requisite for a government whose power lies in the hands of the people. Yet, education in Indonesia prioritizes obedience, hierarchy, and performance, not critical literacy. Formal education during the colonial period fostered obedience towards colonial power. The New Order administration focused on developing militaristic human resources. Such approaches, inherited in present day, hinders the development of critical thinking, resulting in a population less equipped to question authority or reason independently. Additionally, extremely underpaid and underqualified teachers and a rapidly changing curriculum yield poor student performances and low literacy skills. Beyond formal educational institutions, political figures have repeatedly passed on conflicting messages, creating a gray area in ethical political practices. The slogan, "Take their money but do not vote for them," proclaimed by Japanese officials illustrates just this. Although such messages aim to show that vote buying is ineffective instead of encouraging it, citizens without proper critical reasoning may instead feel inclined to engage in money politics. But even though the democratic values education is necessary, many Indonesians who are faced with practices of money politics often find their values to conflict with their economic realities. Even with proper education, economic disparity plays a bigger role in determining citizens' political behavior. The World Bank measures that an astounding 68% of Indonesians live in economic precarity, barely able to afford rent, utilities, even basic meals. This demographic is more vulnerable to money politics because they tend to gravitate towards immediate benefits to sustain their daily survival. Ultimately, citizens who feel underrepresented eventually respond in two ways. One, they encounter politics as merely episodic or transactional. Or two, they become volatile, often without the deliberative capacity to substantiate their criticisms. In the first scenario, citizens exhibit a pragmatic attitude, prioritizing short-term benefits over long-term commitments. From their perspective, democracy meant that politicians delivered goods that they would not otherwise receive because they would be forgotten after the election. The voters distance themselves from their principles during these periods and focus on the benefits they are guaranteed to receive. In the second scenario, lower educational level leads to preferences to resort to aggression. Most hostile and anarchist movements are caused by citizens' misinterpretation of the freedom to express opinions, reflecting a deficiency in critical thinking skills. When citizens with such mindsets face an unresponsive government, they sometimes resort to anarchist behaviors to escape a communication stalemate. Education is paramount for substantive deliberation, but accessibility and the freedom of speech are no less important. As people of a democratic nation, we have the rights and responsibility to be actively engaged with the enactment of Indonesia's constitutional principles. Nonetheless, some believe that deliberation is already facilitated. The people are already represented, even if they feel otherwise. While it is true that access to dialogue has been regulated by the DPR programs and the protection of journalism, both approaches have been proven to be ineffective and inefficient. Journalism especially still faces constant threats, a recurring trend across time. Megawati's administration marked her perception that the media is complicated and unpatriotic. Jokowi's was known for the rise of digital media, buzzers, and the harassment of journalists, which has only gotten worse in the current administration under Prabowo, proving that although the country constitutionally guarantees press freedom, the government officials still have anti-criticism tendencies. Others have also claimed that Indonesian citizens are not ready to partake in deliberation because they have a lack of education. Indeed, Indonesian citizens' education is still far from ideal. But this should not be a dead end for reform. Political awareness has been amplified through social media, and through it, we can see that the younger generation has a passion for politics. 2019, hashtag reformasi di korupsi on Twitter became a means for deliberation. 2022, hashtag tolak omnibus law. 2025, hashtag peringatan darurat, and hashtag Indonesia gelap. Indonesian citizens care for their country. Combined with education system that prioritizes critical thinking and comprehension, it is possible to strive for a much more substantive political participation. Throughout this thesis, the shortcomings of Indonesia's democracy have been dissected, and so is its ultimate solution: a system of deliberation. The flaws of our democracy are rooted in our historical and cultural context, both of which permeate into our governmental structure and citizens' political behavior. Justly, skepticism arises when these circular issues are addressed. People tend to believe that pursuing a functioning democracy is futile. Well, these arguments fail to account for one critical fact: Indonesia is loved by its people. Montesquieu declared, "A government is like everything else. To preserve it, we must love it." Deliberation, as its name entails, means we have also the responsibility to rein in the system, to show that we understand what is happening and thus are not easily fooled. Last March, Ibu Sumarsi, with other volunteers and victim families, had just celebrated the 900th Aksi Kamisan. 900 Thursdays have they stood under scorching heat and relentless rain in front of the only people who have the answers to their cries for justice. Nearly 30 years of unanswered laments where families dine together with one unattended chair, one empty plate. In an interview, Ibu Sumarsi was asked if she forgives what had happened to Wawan. She was silent before replying, "Who should I forgive? No one has confessed. No one has taken responsibility." What might happen if the government had truly listened, not only to Ibu Sumarsi, but to the countless voices that have long demanded to be heard? Perhaps justice would not have been postponed for decades. Perhaps grief will not have to be carried into weekly acts of silent protest. Perhaps we would live to see the country that Wawan and Ibu Sumarsi fought for and built brick by brick. The Indonesia that upholds its fourth Pancasila. A democracy guided by the unanimity that arise out of representations in deliberation. To attain this aspiration, we must first be willing to remain informed through credible sources, and to uphold the rule of law at the individual level. Lastly, democracy demands the courage to voice dissent, not just through blind pessimism, but through reasoned and constructive arguments. Deliberation is both the issue we need to address and the solution that follows. Let us each place a brick on a monument that is our homeland. Let us provide the next generation with the tools to speak and a system willing to listen. Because now we only have two choices: speak now or forever hold your peace. Thank you.
Great job, Refa. Our panelists today are Mr. Tony and Mr. Rio. Let's let Mr. Tony go first.
Hi, Refa.
Hi, Mr.
Excellent speech, and I really enjoy your speech.
Thank
And I have to admit, when I read your paper, I'm not fully understand the paper. A lot of things that I need to learn. So I learned from your paper and your speech. Yeah, this is educational for me. So excellent job. Well done. Yeah. Now I have a few questions, and forgive me if you have answer in your speech, but I didn't catch it. Let's start with this one first. Can you repeat what is your thesis statement that you want to defend?
Yes, so my thesis statement is that Indonesia currently lacks the adequate foundation to pursue its current form of democracy, and that we have to advocate for a deliberative reform.
Okay, well, that's good. I would like to ask you about this. Yeah, I would like to start with: is this a cultural problem rooted in our culture, but everybody don't like to argue frontally, disagree in the public, and so on and so on? Or is it something that should be curable in Indonesia?
Okay, so if I may clarify, so you're saying if the crisis of deliberation is an inherent cultural problem or if it's something that can be changed?
Yes.
Okay. So I believe that our actions and political behaviors within this country is definitely rooted and have been influenced by a lot of social cultural like context, such as, like I've said before, we have sustained a long-term feudal system, and then we have patronage culture and patronage relationships. So I do believe that our behaviors are often influenced, whether we realize it or not, by these kind of social cultural context we live in. However, I also do believe that with enough awareness and with proper socialization, just like what I aim to do with my thesis here, is for us to be able to expose and to be able to be aware and acknowledge the social cultural context in which we live in, and thus can recognize when we start acting that way, or we notice or recognize a society that does so. So I believe that it is possible to be cured or to be able to realize and move on from that kind of context and
Yeah.
behaviors.
Well, very good. Now, if we follow the suggestion or the idealism, and finally in 20 years or 30 years whatsoever, Indonesia have that, yeah, already grown in this democracy. Do you think you will find Indonesia as a true Indonesia or a Western Indonesia?
Okay,
Western,
so
Westernized, I mean, yeah.
Okay. So I believe that, of course, different cultures and different frameworks, especially when we're talking about governmental system, can influence the way our tradition works or the way our social system works. But I do believe that Indonesia would not be entirely westernized just because we implement this kind of framework in democracy. Actually, I believe that deliberation democracy do have consistent values with our current democracy. So it does not come in, I do not advocate this framework to entirely change the democratic system of our country right now, but because with deliberative democracy, we can have this specific framework and requirements that we can check and see if our democratic system is working or not, so that we have a more specific framework to work on. But I believe that it's like deliberative democracy has similar values aligned to what we already have right now, which is musyawarah and mufakat, which is already in our Pancasila and constitution system. So I do believe that nothing too radical or nothing too different will change in our system.
Yeah, good knowledge and very well done with the answer. Let me continue with this. If we see the whole world, they are, like you said, 40% of the nation are choosing democracy. Yeah. But I believe they have also their own problem.
Yes.
And some of them are exactly the one that you mentioned. So is it because of the nation problem, or actually is the democracy system flaws?
Okay. So I believe that both things can be true at the same time. And in a way that this is this is outside my thesis, but it's just a knowledge that I have. A lot of like ancient philosophers are actually against democracy as a system. And what I feel that I am aligned to is Aristotle's perspective, in which that Aristotle claims that there are three governmental structures, which is democracy, and then we have aristocracy, and we have monarchy. But Aristotle says that even though democracy is the most messy one and the most prone to accept any kind of distortion or corruption, Aristotle believes that democracy is the safest one because we have so many safeguards that can actually prevent any sort of oligarchic leadership or even like tyranny. So I do believe that democracy is a flawed system, but it is one of the best systems that we have right now in society.
Well done. Last one is, I believe you mastered this well, but I haven't seen what your thesis relate to the Bible.
Okay. So if I were to be able to connect it to a Bible first, I would say it's Romans 13, 1 until 7, which that Romans 13, 1 until 2 says that we have to follow what the government says. Like we have to be able to respect and to submit to the government. And a lot of people might interpret it as literally, as in like even though we have a corrupt democracy or a corrupt government system, we have to follow through without action, without questions being asked. But actually, in that context of that time, Paul was writing to the Jews that was already kind of persecuted or being a minority in Rome, that they should not provoke any kind of like violent behaviors or violent demonstrations towards the government, because not only will that endanger them as a community, but also that God does not condone violence and he prefers respected deliberations. So I do believe that already is aligned with what I'm advocating for here. And if we move after that, I think in around verse 5, the Bible also says that not only does it condemn the citizens who fight against the governments in violence, but it also reminds the leaders that they should deter bad behaviors instead of good ones. So I think it shows a perfect balance between government system and the ethical place in society.
Well done.
All right, we need to move on to Mr. Rio.
Eva?
Hi, Mr.
First of all, congratulations on your thesis. It was well made. When I read your thesis, it was well made, and then you have a good foundation. Because I know I heard from you yourself that you watch a lot regarding about politics, even your podcast. So, personally, your thesis has a bold claim. Yeah, this has a bold claim. Especially, it relates with the foundation of our governmental system, democracy.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Before we go to your analysis, I will ask some clarification related to your paper, and then we will proceed with our analysis, all right?
Okay.
First clarification. In page 9, you state that Indonesia lacks a proper transitional period, and one of the aspects is about it needs better economic development.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you elaborate more on this statement, and what kind of better economic development that do you expect? Since we know that Indonesia itself has become 16th largest economy worldwide and the best one in the Southeast Asia.
Okay, that is a really good point. So I would argue that economic development is one of the foundations of democratic transition, in which that I acknowledge that I did not look too much into economic development within Indonesia's transition, but I also recognize that it has it is one of the biggest like economic country in Southeast Asia because of its sheer size and the amount of like resources that we have. So I believe that economic development is not essentially one of the most critical features that stuttered our democratic transition. But I also believe at the same time that because our country is still going on through its democratic transition, since we are still considered a newer democracy when we compare with other countries, governmental trust and political stability also plays a huge part in our economic stability and development. And those two I can see is still a bit lacking in Indonesia, especially in recent times, as you have known. So I do believe that economic development that I understand is still hindered in that terms for Indonesia.
That's a good answer. That it's not only the economic aspect that might hinder democracy, but there are other aspects. Good job. Now, this is a simple one actually. Give us, because we need to understand more about your concept of deliberative democracy. Give us an example of a policy or law or UUD, you can name it, that you make that represent the concept of your deliberative democracy that you promote here.
If I may clarify, so is it that the framework that I'm like no need for already existing ones, right? Okay, so interesting thing is that a few months ago, France actually take in this framework and implement it with their citizens. So this happened after their yellow fast movements or the working class movements in which that a lot of their citizens protest against for feeling underrepresented, like voicing their concerns about climate change, environmental crisis, job crisis, minimum wage, and etc., etc. So the French government actually looked into this and responded by making a lot of like public gatherings and facilitation where citizens can join in voluntarily and gather there for a few days. And when you get in, you should choose one of the main concerns that you have regarding policies or regulations, and then you can join in the other people who are in the same group. And over the next few days, you actually can make some kind of law or regulations that can be passed to the representatives or the government to be further considered and even implemented. Like they passed a few bills based on that. And I believe that it is a very effective and efficient movement that the government of France made, because not only one, it made them realize and connect directly to the citizens, like it made them retrack and recalibrate to see what the citizens actually are concerned about and what their needs are, but also the citizens feel heard and feel represented because at least even if the bills are not passed, they believe that the people are reading what they are saying. So I think it is a very important thing.
All right, thank you. You take from other country as well. Good job, good job. All right, now before we go to the analysis, I want you to, do you agree or disagree to this statement? That Indonesia inherently has a problem, or that everything is politicized, or we can say politicized, and that our politics is based on profits. Do you agree or not to that?
I'm sorry, can you please clarify?
Do you agree that Indonesia inherently, up until today, even from you stated that in history that even the culture of Indonesian politics is based on politicizing everything, interest, power, and profits.
Okay. I would say I agree, but I would also like to define what politics is. Because politics is, like, from its basic definition, is the act of persuading other people to actually decide on something or do what you want to do. So it's the act of persuasion, right? And I believe that when we define politics as that, we engage in politics in our everyday life. So everything is inherently political, especially now that we live in a structured government and a structured system. So I do believe that everything in Indonesia is politicized, and everything in the world is also politicized. And that's not inherently a bad thing.
Good job. Okay, so I have follow-up question to that.
Okay.
Yeah, you said that deliberative democracy involves consensus. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, good. And we know that Indonesia community consisted of different culture, norms, and even beliefs. Yeah. Even outside the religion that is accepted by the government, people believe other belief. Yeah. How would you ensure in your case that Indonesia will make a decisive policy on time within a limited time that we have? I know that Indonesian government up until today, even with our current system, delay their policy, especially a policy that might harm the government bad apple's interest, such as the Undang-Undang Perampasan Aset. So how would you respond to that?
Okay, that is a very interesting question. That is very complex. So there are so many things to address, but I would like to address one thing first, in which that I forgot. Okay, so I believe that addressing what you said earlier about diversity, I think diversity is precisely the reason why we have to have deliberation. Because if we don't have deliberation that can be inclusive and be representative to other peoples, then we could have, in the end, an excluded minority or even majority that dominates everything. And I think that would lead to more conflict. And in terms of slow decision making, I believe that it is one of the costs of democracy, because compared to like fast decision making you would have in an authoritarian government, one person or one party just says something and then it got like passed or ratified immediately. However, with democracy, we do have to listen to different oppositions, to different opinions, to different considerations. But I think that is what makes democracy one of the more fair and just the government that we have right now. So in terms of slow decision making, I believe that it is something that is to be expected from a democracy and the cause of a good democratic government. Although, of course, when we can still improve in whether it will be like really slow in decision making or like really fast. And I believe that in that terms, both the government and the people can work together in terms of like political literacy with the people and even transparency from the government.
Good job. So every layer in the society needs to work on the policy. Good job. All right. Actually, we can discuss a lot of things from here. Trust me. And I have a lot of questions. But the time is up. I give the time to you, Mr. Ruid.
All right, we're almost done. I have one question myself. So there is no such thing, I think, as a perfect democracy if you look through the world. And in fact, Americans used to brag about their democracy, and we see what's happening. It seems more and more like we've got a dictator almost, right? Because
That's true.
people are human. Presidents try to take power, and we try to be deliberative. We try to have conversation. We try to have critical thinking, and yet people just label themselves, and it's just a big show sometimes. And so don't you think that at least what Indonesia has is a good starting point, and we should just know that it's a tough road ahead, and we will get there over time? Isn't that enough to know that we've started in the right direction here?
I think you do have some points in which that we shouldn't dwell on the past too much and move forward with our democracy with some understanding that we are a newer democracy and at least the people do have a passion for political participation. But what I'm advocating in my thesis is not that we necessarily should dwell in the past, but if we want to address the root problems that keep happening and like circular problems in our democratic system, that we have to address where they come from. So I think the awareness and the knowledge that we derive our political behavior and our structural system from something that we can learn to understand is very important for us to start addressing the problem itself.
Great. Time is up. You've done a great job, Refa. Okay. Great job, Refa. So what we'll do, friends, family, panelists, and advisor will meet on the stage for photos. We will have a